Well, good morning. What a joy to be with you today and to look out and see some of the young people that are here today and remember that he was like you. And we have fond memories of your pastor. And I know that when I have a chance to meet people that are his friends, you, that I am going to enjoy them because I know him. And so what a privilege to get to know you today. I don't know how you've come today, but how many know there's a few things in the world that could bring a little bit of fear?
Yes.
There's a lot of people that ask me about this whole thing with ISIS, and it seems like every week there's another announcement they make or another beheading or 300 Christians captured or threats against malls in our country. And I would encourage you, if you're interested in God's plan and why this is all coming to this almost a desire for America to come to the Middle East, it's because God has a plan. And I encourage you to understand that, and we've put it in here for you to understand, and you can help other people understand it as well. Where did all this start? Where did all this begin in Scripture? And we're going to look at some of that today and help you understand that. And then I want all of you to say this with me. God's plan is not for me to worry.
God's plan is not for you to worry.
Okay, just say that one more time. Now, let's be honest. How many of you find yourself worrying? Thank you for being honest. And so, Vicki and I, and Vicki is here today, and it's good to have her with me. But we went through a season, where we had to learn this when everything got dark. How many of you know what I mean when I say everything got dark? And we had to change. We had to what? We had to change the way we approached situations and problems and move them from being worrisome to handling them biblically. And so I encourage you to get that. They're back there. And then I want you to do one more thing. I have with me some beautiful little colored crosses. They're from purple to pink to black to different colors. And I want you to get one of these, and I want you to start wearing it from now until Easter, and then maybe even after Easter. And I want you to look for the opportunities for people to say, oh, that's an interesting cross. Wow, look at the color. And every time that happens, what are you going to talk about? You're going to talk about the difference between following Jesus and religion. Mm-hmm. And you're going to understand that today. And you're going to then be able to invite them to Easter here at Faith. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yes.
How many of you can believe that if you invited one person and they came, that on Easter Sunday here, we could see this place with over 300 people?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
See, that's possible. Mm-hmm. And this is a little tool. This is what's called a conversation starter, all right? So I want you to get one of these, and I want you to start wearing it. Now, you may not ever wear a cross. You may not wear much jewelry, but you're wearing this for what? This is a what?
Testimony.
This is a conversation starter. It's a testimony. It's a chance to begin a conversation, and you will find people will look at these because they are very unique, and they're made with nails, and it's just really got some unique things in it, okay? So I encourage you to get those and just wear them, because I want you to begin to have a chance to just share faith. It's called the gospel. Where did the gospel begin? Where did that start? Well, it started in the Old Testament. But the problem is, St. Augustine's words have been forgotten. So I want to give them to you before we begin to look at this today. All right? So St. Augustine said this: the Old Testament is a finely furnished room that is dimly lit. And you cannot see all that the Old Testament contains unless you let the light in from the New Testament. All right? So how many of you have ever opened a window shade? Okay? So what do you do when you open a window shade? How many of you have ever reached up, grabbed the string or the cord or the chain? Okay, so just do that. Just do that. Okay? Reach up, and open the shade. All right? Now, in a little bit, I'm going to ask you to do that. And when I ask you to do that, we're going to let the light in from the New Testament onto the Old Testament. All right? You cannot see all that the Old Testament contains. See, the two are one. The Bible is one story. About who? Jesus. Say that again. Say it again. Okay, the Bible is one story about Jesus. And if you don't understand that, you're going to get pulled into pluralism today. So if messages can be preached in churches that can also be preached in synagogues or mosques, okay? So if you just talk moralistic messages or allegorical messages, and you talk the Old Testament and don't take it to who? Jesus, then you can talk them. They'll be glad to have you in any mosque or any synagogue. All you have to do is just keep Jesus out. All right? And in your conversations, if you're not careful, you're going to start being pulled into this at work and at school and at university. And you're going to talk about God, but the Bible is not about God. It's about, say that again, who is part of the Godhead. Okay? So this is really important today, and I want you to see this, and I want you to understand this, because with all the worry and all the fear, I want you to understand something really important. Because as I think about this, I think about a young lady who came into a place just like Faith. And when she came, her life had been filled with all kinds of heartache, disappointment, rejection. When she was very young, her dad was hit over the head with a tire iron as he came out of the steel mills in Pennsylvania, and they left him for dead. He would never be able to return home, and her mother became an alcoholic, a brutal alcoholic. How many know it's one thing to be an alcoholic, but to be abusive? And she was abusive, and she was so abusive that Patty's two older sisters left the house when she was young, left her with her mother. They went off. They were older. They were able to go off. They eventually got married. Patty was left in the house. And Patty, mom, so abusive, this alcoholic mother, that at age 9, now picture this, think about this, 9 years old, Patty comes home from grade school and her mother has abandoned her. Gone. Left. And she finds relatives in the area that take her in, and from age 9 to age 14, she's there with those relatives, but all along the way, she keeps wanting to get back to her sister. She keeps wanting to go to her oldest sister because she is longing for family. She's longing for love. How many of you know what I'm talking about? We all want that. And so at 14 years old, now picture this, 14 years old. How old are you, dude? 14. Isn't that interesting? Could you imagine at 14 getting on a train in Pennsylvania all alone and riding a train across the United States to Wisconsin, where the last address of your sister was, and you're going there all alone, 14 years old. You run out of money in Chicago. You don't have enough money to buy the ticket from Chicago to Wisconsin, and a total stranger walks up and buys your ticket. And Patty, at 14, gets to the city where her sister was supposed to be living, and guess what? She moved. She left. And so as she gets to this city, they gather her up, and the state wants her to be now put somewhere. And so she meets a young lady, and the young lady says, "Why don't you come home with me?" And so she just goes home to a house a family she'd never met before. And the reason that she went there is because the girl that she met at school, when they put her in the school, the girl that she met at the school said, "My daddy is a milkman." And a milkman, how many know a milkman in those days knew everything? So if somebody moved, who knew? Yeah, either the milkman or the mailman, right? So they said, "Why don't you come home? My dad maybe know. My daddy may know." And so she went home, and sure enough, he said, "Well, I did know where she lived, and she did move, and I think she moved to this city, and and here's what I'll do. I'll let my second oldest son drive you up there." 14 years old. And so that young man drove her up there to her sister. And when she got there to her sister locked the screen door as she saw him walking up with the suitcase, and said through the screen door, "Don't bring her bag in here. She's not staying here." Now listen, it's one thing to be rejected at 9 by your mother. It's another thing to be rejected at 14 by your sister. How many of you know what it's like to feel hurt, disappointment? Well, it was interesting because as they drove back down to the southern part of Wisconsin, and Patty was turned over to the foster care and was put in a foster home there in that city, that young man went off to the Air Force. But before he left for the Air Force, Patty would continue to come to that house, and he got to know her, and she got to know him, and he came back from his stay in the military, and he came back, and he said he wanted to marry her, and so they got married at 15. She got married. Now, how many know she was ready for marriage? 15 years old, 1 year older than you, and she's married to this guy who had been in the military. And they rummaged through their envelopes at their wedding to get enough money to pay for the room that they stayed in that night. And then, you know, if you have marital problems, he had an illness, and he had to leave the military, and they started a business, and they're trying to run this business, and they're trying to make a marriage work, and they brought all of their baggage into that marriage. And if you want to solve problems in a marriage, you know what to do: get pregnant. And a little baby boy was born. And now she's a teenage wife and a teenage mother. Now listen. Because she tried her best. She drugged that little boy to their place of work, and that little boy was raised where they worked, and then a little girl was born, but the little girl wasn't healthy. And when the little girl was brought home, she turned blue in the crib, and they rushed her to the hospital, and the doctor said, "We don't know if she's going to live or not." And someone invited her to a place like Faith. I don't know how you got here today. I don't know who invited you. I don't know what you've been going through. But Patty was sitting there that day, and listen to this. The speaker that day wasn't the pastor. It was a guest, like me. She knew nothing. She didn't know anything about the music. She didn't know anything about what the worship service was like. And maybe you're here today and you don't get it. You don't get the worship. You don't get the whole service. And maybe that's you. Maybe that's how you've come. And the speaker that day mentioned a name. The name Abraham. Well, she knew the name Abraham because her father, Patty's father, was a Russian Jew. And Abraham was the father of their faith. And that she never went to church. She never knew anything about Judaism, really, except that Abraham was the father of the faith. And the speaker that day said, I want you to look with me at Genesis chapter 15. And so here she looks, and up there on the screen in Genesis chapter 15 is this passage. And it says these words, and you can read them up here. It says these words, it says it real clear. It says that the word of the Lord came to Abraham, and what did he say? Now that's interesting, because Abraham's called the father of our faith, and he's filled with, can you say oxymoron? Okay, so Abraham, the father of faith, is filled with fear, okay? All right, and he's filled with fear, and the Lord says, I will be your shield, your reward, and you shall be very great. Wow, this is incredible. Isn't this what God's supposed to do? And then this is what we tell people, well, trouble comes, but God shows up. God shows up. But what does Abraham say? Father of our faith. Look at this, look at this. Abraham says, I doubt it. Read it. He said, you promised me a son. And you haven't come through on your last promise, and now you want me to believe this promise. Now, you got to understand why Abraham was afraid. Because how many know it pays to read the previous chapters? Okay, so chapter 14, he had a nephew named Lot who was captured by a group of what was then ISIS thugs. See, this problem has been around since way back then. ISIS is nothing new. They had captured Lot and his family, and they were going to kill him, probably behead him, and they were going to keep the women and keep his riches. Nothing different today was happening in Genesis. And Abraham decides he's going to be the first SEAL Team 6. And then he had ridden down and he had recaptured Lot and his family and all of his wealth, and they'd ridden out, but Abraham was afraid now they were going to come after him. And he's afraid, and God shows up. Now, how many would like God to show up? This is a theophany. God actually shows up and talks to him. Could you imagine that? And he says, I doubt it. You promised me a son, and you haven't come through on that promise. So why should I believe this promise? Now, one of my favorite movies, there is this guy who's half God, and it's one of these Marvel comic characters movies. And this half God guy says to the Incredible Hulk, he says, I am a god. And the Hulk grabs him and slams him on the ground, and just leaves him bloodied and battered on the ground. And Hulk looks down at him and says, wimpy God. How many have seen it? If you haven't, you need to. But some of you in this room today think that's the way God looks at you. If you look at him and say you doubt his promises. See, some of you think that if you doubt God's promises, if you doubt his word, that God is going to be angry. But I want you to see this. Is God angry with Abraham? No, he's not angry at all. He takes him by the hand, and he takes him outside. Now I want you to see this, because he takes him by the hand. Listen to me. There are churches who tell people that if they say the wrong thing out of their mouth, or if they say the wrong thing about God's promises, or if they doubt, that they're to blame for their problems. And those churches produce what we call today cynics. Okay? Because God wants to take our hand. He wants to walk with us. And he takes him outside and he says, look up, look up, look up, look up. He says, what do you see? What do you see? And he says, I see stars. And he says, how many? And he says, that's the number. That's the number of your descendants. That's how many kids you're going to have. I'm going to come through. I'm going to come through. And you're not going to have one son. You're going to have all these descendants. And Abraham says, I believe, but. How many know when your mother, when you tell her a story and she says, I believe you, but, how many know you're in trouble? Right? When your wife says, but, you're in trouble. Now watch this. He says, but, I don't trust myself. He says, I don't think I can come through for you. Now, how many of you have ever doubted yourself? Huh? How many of you have ever doubted you'd be good enough for God? How many of you have ever doubted you'd be good enough for marriage? How many of you have ever doubted you'd be a good father? Right? Okay? A good child at 15. And the reason Abraham doubts himself is because now he's about 80. And God's saying he's going to have these babies. And he knows no matter how much Old Spice he splashes on, it isn't happening. It isn't happening because he knows, he's thinking of his wife, and she's old too. It'd be like God walking down right now, looking at one of you three gals and going, you're going to have a baby. You'd go, wait a minute, you looked at me lately. Listen, some of you have looked at yourself and you've doubted. You look at the world and you say it's changed. Yes, it has. Yes, it has. But guess who hasn't changed? Listen, some of you forget that. Some of you are so worried about how the world's changed that you've forgotten that you're not holding the world's hand. Are you? Because if you're holding the world's hand, then you got something to worry about. But if you're holding God's hand, then why are you complaining about the changes? Well, the church has changed. Well, if you're holding the church's hand, you got something to worry about. But if you're holding God's hand, nothing's changed. So why are you complaining about the changes in the church?
That's good.
You're holding the wrong hand. And I love this because Abraham's filled with fear. He's filled with doubt about God's promises. He's filled with doubt about himself. And he's called Father of our... I think that's what your church is named after. Listen to me. You can have fears and doubts about yourself and about him, but always come holding his hand and tell him what's going on. Just talk to him. And he says this to Abraham. Now watch this, because here's what he says. He says, go and get 3 big animals. He said, I want you to go get 3 3-year-olds, verse 9. And he says, I want you to get a heifer, and I want you to get a ram. Next slide. And I want you to get those, and I want you to bring them to me. Now this is really important because Abraham understands this and we don't. Can you say, I don't get it? Why does God say you're supposed to bring these 3 animals? Why are you supposed to bring them? But Abraham understood. And the reason we don't understand is because in that day it was an oral culture. It was not a written culture. So how many of you have ever bought a house? How many of you had to sign a sheet of paper? How many times? Over and over and over and over and over. Because that signature means what? What does the signature mean? Either you pay it back or what? They come take the house, take the car, take the cat, take the dog. You got to pay it back. And if you don't pay it back, they're going to take whatever you've got to pay it back. And in that day, it wasn't it was an oral culture, so they acted it out. And so what you would do is if you were borrowing money or you were trying to lease land, you would bring your most expensive animal that you could sacrifice. In other words, you got enough money, you can sacrifice it. You can kill that animal. It doesn't matter. I'm rich enough, I can pay you back, and I'll show you I can kill this animal. And they would cut the animal in half, and they would lay it on the ground. Now listen, God asked for 3 big animals. He says, you're wealthy, go get that stuff, bring him out here. And Abraham says, I'll gladly do it. He cuts him in half, lays him on the ground. And here's what Abraham thinks. What they would do is they would walk between the animals, and they would go to the left, go to the right, and they would do this symbol of infinity. What does infinity mean? Forever. In other words, Abraham thought that he would sacrifice these animals, and that he would say, hey, I'll make this happen. I'll keep my promises, God, and if I don't, because I want you to see what this meant. Watch this, watch this. Look at this, Jeremiah chapter. This is really, really important. Next slide up there. Look at what it says. Here's what it says in Jeremiah. Here's what it says. I will give the men who have transgressed my covenant, who have not performed the words of my covenant, which they made before me, when they cut the calf in 2 and passed between the parts of it, I will give them into the hands of their enemies and into the hands of those that seek their life, and their what? Dead bodies shall be what? Meat for the birds. In other words, if you didn't pay back these loans in that day, whoever you owed the money to could kill you and throw you out on the ground just like those halves of the animals. Now, how many of you know that would have solved the 2008 Wall Street crisis? But we don't do that today. But if you go to a Jewish wedding, they still walk the symbol of infinity as bride and groom, because it's forever. Watch this. So Abraham lays him out. He thinks that God is wanting him to walk in front of him and say, I'll do it, God, I won't doubt you anymore, and I'll do this right, and I'll do it my way. Now listen, that is religion. That is religion. So if we do it, it's religion. I got to keep these rules. I know I can. I know I can. Thomas the Train. I think I can. I think I can. I think I can do it. I know I can do it. Oh, God, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it. Oh, God, I'll make a promise. I do it. I do it. I do it. And that's what Abraham wanted. He thought he would say that. I can do it, God, and I promise you, and I promise you, and if I don't, you can kill me. You can kill me. And all of a sudden, as the animals are laying on the ground, read it. It says the darkness fell on the earth when it wasn't supposed to get dark. And out of the sky comes a lightning bolt of fire. It's one thing to see lightning, as we will in the next few weeks. Some of you have been so anxious for spring, but guess what's coming? Lightning and tornadoes and hail. And the lightning came out of the sky, but the problem was this time the lightning stayed frozen in space. Just the same word here for lightning, for fire, that's the same word when God came down on Mount Carmel and when God came down to give the 10 Commandments. It's the same word. It's God himself shows up, and he starts moving between the halves. And Abraham cannot believe what he sees, and he falls to the ground, and he falls to the ground, and he falls to the ground. Brad Pitt, he's not. He falls to the ground because he can't believe what he's seeing. He cannot believe what he is seeing because God is moving between the halves. The fire is lapping up the blood off the ground of these animals that have been slaughtered, just like putting a steak on the grill and the smoke rises. It says it was like someone had a smoking pot. The blood is being consumed, risen, it's being heated by this fire, and the smoke is everywhere, and God is moving around the left, through the middle, around the right, and he is making the symbol of infinity, and Abraham falls to the ground because what God is saying is, Abraham, yeah, I know you're going to fail me. I know you're going to doubt me. I know you're not going to get it right. And I know you're going to make all kinds of sin and mistake. But I am going to do it in your place. And when you do this, they're going to kill me and they're going to throw me out for the birds to eat. All right, open the window. Open the window. Come on, lift your hand. Lift your hand. Lift your hand. Pull the shade open. Look what it says in Mark. Look what it says in Mark. Look what it says. Read it. Read it right there. There it is. What's it say in Mark? It says, when it was the middle of the day, darkness falls on the earth. Wait a minute. Where did we just read this? In Genesis 15. And it says, darkness falls on the earth, and Jesus hangs upon the cross, and he cries out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why hast thou forsaken me? Do you understand what was happening? Jesus was taking our sin upon himself. Jesus was going to descend into hell so that you and I would never have to descend into hell. Jesus was paying the price for our sin so we would never have to pay the price for our sin. And when he cries out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? It was a shriek. It was a scream. Why? Because for the first time in eternity, Jesus had been one with the Godhead, one with the Father. But on the cross, he was separated from the Father so that you and I would never have to be separated. You see, you've got to understand something. This is so important, and if you don't get this, you don't understand the gospel, and you don't understand true faith, and you don't understand following Jesus. And I'm concerned that there are some here today that don't. Because when those ISIS terrorists came into France and they massacred their 17 people, they yelled on the streets, we have avenged the prophet. We have avenged the prophet. But when Jesus hung on the cross, he said, I've avenged your children, Father. I've avenged your children. You see, when they strap a bomb to their chest and kill hundreds, they think that they are now making it right between them and Allah, between them and God. So they strap the bomb to their chest and die as martyrs. But Jesus strapped the bomb to his chest and died as the martyr. That's the difference between religion and following Jesus. And if you don't see it, you don't understand why the leader of Al-Qaeda said the other day, we must defeat the cross and we will go to Rome to do it. You see, the issue is the cross. So when you put it on, know what it means. Because what it means is you will never have to be separated from the Father. Now I want you to watch this, because the hardened soldiers, the hardest soldier, the Marines of that day, the centurions, fell to the ground. Like who? Like who? Like Abraham, and declared, surely he was the Son of God. You see, if you miss the most important passage in Genesis, you're going to miss the most important passage in the New Testament. Because if you don't understand it started then, you won't understand why it continues now. Listen to me. Patty was sitting there that day. And the speaker said, if you come today and you embrace the cross and you take up the cross and you follow Jesus, Jesus will come into your life and he'll forgive you of your sin and he'll give you grace and mercy because he paid the price for your sin. And he will be your freedom from sin, and he will heal you because on that cross. He bore the stripes, and healing became a part of our life. He came to redeem everything. And she said, I want my baby healed, and I want to be forgiven, and I want to be free from all of this. And she grabbed the hand of her 3-year-old boy, and she walked to the front of that church, and she embraced the cross and surrendered to Jesus. And boy, am I glad she did, because Patty is my mother, and I am that 3-year-old boy. Listen to me. Listen to me today. Listen. There are some of you sitting here today that have not embraced the cross. You've embraced the church. You've embraced the Bible. You've embraced Christian values. But you've never embraced the cross. You've never heard Jesus' word, take up my cross. What does that mean? That doesn't mean you embrace his suffering. That means you embrace what he did. That means you receive what he already accomplished. You take his cross and you follow Jesus. Would you bow your heads with me today? No one moving in this room today. I don't know your past. I don't know your hurts. I don't know your doubts, and I don't know your fears, and I don't know your sin. I don't know what you've done or who you've done it with. But I do know this. I know what Jesus did. I know the cross is real. I know that he rose from the dead after descending to hell so that we would never have to go there. And he arose from the grave so that even our bodies will be redeemed one day. They can't even stay in the ground. If you embrace the cross, everything in your life gets redeemed. Everything. All evil is turned to good because of the cross. You say, but you don't know me. You don't know my past. I don't. You don't know my mother. You don't know what she did. You don't know what happened. You don't know all of that. But Jesus made it new. And today, Jesus is going to make it new for you. How many of you in this room would say, Sam, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I have embraced the cross. I'm carrying the cross. I'm living for the cross. I'm following Jesus. Everything is right between me and Jesus, and I have not walked away from the cross. Now, if you have, you know it. But if you haven't, and you're carrying the cross, and everything is right with you and Jesus, and you say, I understand it, and I embrace it, and I live it, lift your hand. Lift it up if that's you. You may take it down. Now, there were many of you that did not lift your hand. But today, just like that speaker gave my mother an opportunity to embrace the cross. My mother went home that night and told my father, and the next day my father came and embraced the cross. Everything changed in our home, and everything's going to change in your home. My sister was healed. She's well and alive today. Listen. Everything's going to change for you if you'll embrace the cross.